Welcome to the Stop Suffering in Silence podcast with your host, Denise Walsh and Rachel Timothy. Hey, you guys. Welcome back to Stop Suffering in Silence podcast. Today, I am your host, Rachel Timothy, and I want to make sure that nobody is concerned about where Denise Walsh is. She is currently on the black sanded beaches of Costa Rica. She is running one of her dream life retreats as we speak. And so our thoughts and prayers are with her as she's doing fantastic. They are ziplining and doing adventures and having professional chefs come in and take care of them and all of these amazing things while they are also working on personal growth and doing all the things that the amazing Denise Walsh does with preparing people for doing more with their life, saying yes to the things that God has called onto their life and moving forward and growing and all the wonderful things that Denise does in her program. So we are thinking of her. We miss her greatly. And you will notice I am not as good of a speaker on here as she is, but I still wanted to get on and do a podcast this week and share with you something that I have been learning. Recently, I was sitting in car line pickup with my kids. If you know me at all, you know that that is a very long ordeal every single school day. I have 4 kids, and so they go to 2 separate schools. And pickup usually will take me close to 2.5, 3 hours all in all to get my kids picked up and back home. So I'm sitting in Carline pickup and I start listening to a YouTube channel, and it's actually called The Crappy Childhood Fairy. And this is ran by Anna Runkle. And it's an interesting title, interesting name, The Crappy Childhood Fairy. But I learned something from listening to her, and from what I have looked at and listened to, I recommend it. I recommend learning from her. She had some important things to say. And anytime that I am learning more about trauma, it always blows my mind to see myself in what I'm learning and to be able to put words to what I have experienced. And so this was the same thing. It was kind of like years ago when I first picked up the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And I would be reading through it and it would just hit me, oh my goodness, I am not the only one. I'm not the only one who responds this way, or this is why I act this way in these situations. And this is why my brain responds in this way. And there's just so much enlightenment to understanding how our brain works, how God created us to work through trauma, the ways that we protect ourselves, and the ways that we can stop using those protective measures and let God move as we get safer and healthier. The knowledge is power. And the more that we learn, the more that we understand, the more that we can grow. And I love learning about trauma in the aspect of I love to understand better why I feel the way I feel, or what is actually going on inside this brain of mine that sometimes I get so stinking frustrated at. But when I know that there's a good reason and that it makes sense and that there is solutions and tips on how to make it better, then I get really excited because none of us are stuck where we are. And I think that is one thing that at Stop Suffering in Silence, we love to share with our survivors. You're not stuck. You're also not the only one. When you suffer in silence, you often don't learn the resources and the tips or have the community to be able to encourage you to keep growing and keep getting healthier in your healing journey. So as I was learning from Anna Runkle in The Crappy Childhood Fairy, I had a lot of those aha moments of, yeah, that's me. That is me. And it was interesting because she said, this is often the thing that counselors neglect to touch on when they are starting counseling with a trauma survivor. And honestly, her thoughts are, and as I'm learning and studying, I agree with her, this should be the number one, the very first thing that gets covered when working with survivors. And this is neurological dysregulation, or emotional dysregulation is another way that you could say it. And I didn't quite know what that was. And so as I started listening and learning from her, I realized that I absolutely have neurological dysregulation. And I can look back at times in my life when it was um, controlling me in many different ways. And I didn't know what was wrong. Nowadays, I would call it a spiral. I spiral real quickly into this state of extreme emotions and not a lot of logic. But I don't know what causes it all the time. I don't know why it's happening and or how to get out of that dysregulation. Now that I know that it's neurological dysregulation, and now that I know that it is something that a lot of trauma survivors, if not all trauma survivors, suffer with, especially if their trauma is when they were a child, that it's easier to then see that this is more of like an injury based off of what you went through that can be fixed. It's not who you are. It doesn't have to control who you are. But if you don't know what it is, you don't know how to address it. So neurological dysregulation, it comes from trauma. Usually it is because that natural regulation of your brain and your emotions and all of the makeups of yourself get dysregulated when intense trauma gets thrown at you at such a young age. Doctors have been doing a lot of different studies for a long time on the psychology of trauma and how it affects us. And, a lot of them believe that more than anything, it affects your nervous system and it affects you neurological, even more so than psychological, is what they are learning. So being dysregulated ends up making ordinary things extremely difficult. So the way that Anna Runkle described it is the left side of your frontal cortex goes dim. This is your logical reasoning. It goes dim. So like if you were to get an MRI while you were in one of these emotional dysregulated states, you would see your left frontal cortex going dim. It's not lighting up. Whereas the right side of your frontal cortex is in high gear, extremely lit up, and that is your emotions. So basically, you have suppressed your logic, but you're being flooded with emotions, which leads to disaster. I mean, let's be real. It leads to disaster. Okay, so neurological dysregulation, 8 signs. Here's 8 signs that you have or experience neurological dysregulation. Feeling really quick to react or extremely irritable all of a sudden. You get that body tension, slow or shallow chest breathing. You get a brain fog. You're not thinking clearly. You have difficulty making decisions, anxious thoughts, panic, excessive worry, or you feel numb or disconnected. You're easily fatigued, low energy, feeling shame and hopelessness, or emotional flooding and overwhelm. So those are signs that you have neurological dysregulation. Me personally, how I can think of it is I go from 0 to 100, fight or flight, inside of me and have absolutely no idea why. It could just be in a simple conversation, or it could be a facial expression that I see, or just a situation that I'm in. I'm at the grocery store or I'm driving, whatever. And all of a sudden, I can't breathe. Like I feel like I can't breathe. It's like a panic attack. My emotions, like I want to cry. I feel angry, but I have no idea why. I don't know why I feel the way that I feel. It doesn't make sense to me. Um, Irrational, intrusive thoughts just start flooding my brain. and everything feels extremely loud. And I can't hear my own thoughts. I can't make sense of what's going on around me. And my body is reacting as if I am in an intense like fearful, terrifying situation. And I don't have that logical side of my brain working in that moment to know that that's not the case. And so years ago, I can look back at times when that would happen. I can think specifically of one time when I went to an event with my church family. A bunch of us women went to hear Shonda Pierce, a comedian, a Christian comedian, about an hour and a half away from where our church was. And we all went together. It's supposed to be, this amazing, fun time for everybody. And something triggered, I think, in that situation, looking back, it was probably the crowd. When I am in a crowd, I feel like I have to constantly be on high alert and watching, where's the exit, who's near me. I'm just on high alert, and it triggered an emotional dysregulation. And so my logic went out the window and my emotions went through the roof. And it feels like the house is on fire, but nobody else sees it. And so here I am sitting in this crowd with all these people, feeling like I need to run away because the house is on fire, and I'm scared and I'm sad and I'm angry and I'm all these different emotions that I couldn't make sense of and didn't know why, but nobody else could understand in that moment why I was feeling or responding or acting the way that I was. And I sure as heck couldn't explain it. I remember the next day and thinking back to what it was like there at the Shonda Pierce event. And I remember seeing facial expressions of my friends and just frustration. And you can't blame them. Like, why in the world? I remember one person saying, "Why did you even come? Why'd you come? If you knew this was going to be hard, you knew crowds were hard." And I ruined that night for several people. And so then the next day I felt that, and I felt the shame and I felt the guilt. And so then I flatlined. It was too much. I had emotion overload. And then I was like, no, I felt nothing. I was done. I didn't want to face the music. I didn't want to reach out to anybody and apologize because I just felt worthless and an inconvenience in that moment. And all of it started, now I know, because of this neurological dysregulation. Learning from Anna Runkle helped me be able to put a lot of words to this stuff. One of the things that she said is it can be hard to find words. You're unable to focus or complete tasks. You're clumsy. For some people, their handwriting changes in that moment. You often will say things that you don't mean, or you do things that you don't want to do. You go silent, you draw inward, you may feel desperate and act impulsively, or you may fly into a rage. All of these super high emotions. And then she says, almost always, you then go flat. So your emotions have gone way up and then they flatten out and you feel nothing. It's like you give up. Your body's just like done. And so a lot of the times we end up then in that flat stage, feeling or treating people in a cold manner. And here we're treating them coldly after, however long ago, just having this emotional outburst that maybe hurt them in that moment. And so emotional dysregulation is very difficult on relationships. One of the things she said that I thought was so good, and I related to this so much. It is so hard when dysregulation is changing the way that you look at reality and the way that you express yourself. I remember another time being at a Bible study with a group of women, and it happened again. I got flooded with emotions, and I didn't know why. I didn't know what was going on. One of the things that she talked about too is sometimes, flashbacks can lead, so there's really not necessarily anything in your environment that triggers it, except inwardly you are starting a flashback. And for me, oftentimes my flashbacks will start emotionally. And so my emotional dysregulation goes into high gear at the very beginning of a flashback. And so here I was at this Bible study, and I was beginning to feel all these emotions that didn't make sense. And what I would find myself doing is, since everything in my head was so loud, my emotions were so loud, my body was responding again as if I was in a serious crisis moment, and nobody else obviously was feeling it. What I would do is I would try to pretend like I was normal, like I wasn't in this state. Part of me could understand that what I was feeling was not appropriate for the situation, but I didn't know how to stop it. And I wasn't even 100% certain that was true. So much confusion. One of the things she said in her video was, in these moments, you try to pretend like you understand, but you can't. It's all a jumbled mess and you feel disconnected. So you have to try and guess what connected people would say. So when I am in those situations and I'm feeling emotionally dysregulated, I will be thinking so hard about how to respond to what you just said. And I will think and think, not think, what do I feel? What's my thoughts? Because you got to remember, logic is not there in that moment. But instead, I'm trying to think, what would a good friend say in this moment? What would a normal, connected person say in this moment? Because when I'm not emotionally dysregulated, that is how I am a good friend. I do know how to respond to situations. But when I'm in one of those moments, I don't. I cannot remember or think of how to act or how to respond. And my head is so jumbled, and I can't really make sense of the situation in front of me, that um, I'll have weird facial expressions, I'll have a weird response, or I'll jump into something totally different without recognizing that I completely missed what I needed to in the conversation with this person. And so, oh my goodness, I can't even tell you how many times I am certain that in relationships, people have been, like, okay, she doesn't care. She just doesn't care. Or she's so self-centered and so self-absorbed that she doesn't care. And that couldn't be any further from the truth. I care so much. I don't know, in those moments when the logic leaves and the emotions get high, how to express myself in a way that is good and connective to people. And so, oftentimes, like in some of my best relationships that I have, I mean, I've 100% done this. I've 100% let, the emotions go and the logic leave, and said things I didn't mean to say, or I didn't really mean deep at all, but they flew out of my mouth. I did actions that that I never wanted to do. And so then, we would talk about it. However long after, we would have conversations and we would talk about how I responded. Next time, like I'm telling myself, and I'm telling the person that I'm in this relationship with, I'm telling them, next time I won't do this. I'm not going to respond this way next time. I understand now that I responded way out of line, way too emotional. But then the next time comes and that logic isn't there anymore. It once again flies out the window and the emotions go through the roof. And once again, I'm frustrated and I'm apologizing and having to go through all of that again. And honestly, and this is one of the things that Anna Runkle said, and I think she's so right. You have trauma from your childhood, and then you have this dysregulation of your senses, of the neurology of your brain, and your emotions and everything. It's all dysregulated at times that you don't have control over, and it leads to more trauma. it's like trauma on top of trauma. And now it's trauma that you have inflicted. And I don't mean that in like a negative or bashing way of somebody who has trauma. But yeah, I mean, I'm speaking of it from myself. Like, because of my responses in situations, it led to more, not trauma like the extreme trauma I went through as a kid, but emotional trauma, like a lot of hurt and anger and frustration towards myself because I don't function all the time the way that I want to. I'm not able to express myself or stay connected or respond the way that I want to because of this dysregulation. And for so long, I felt so different. I felt like I didn't belong, to be honest, in the world. Like I didn't belong in normal society, that it would be better off to not try to be a friend to somebody or to not create relationships with people because I knew I would destroy it. I knew my emotions would take over. I would say something wrong. I didn't have trust in myself to be able to be in a relationship with somebody and care for them the way that they deserve to be cared for. And often the way that they would care back for me. I couldn't reciprocate it. And so it was frustrating, to say the least. So that being said, as I have started to get healthier, and the more conversations that I've had with people who are healthy and are willing to stick it out with me and in these relationships and talk through things and explain things, I still repeat the same mistakes over and over again. However, I have noticed a huge shift in my emotional regularity, even just the last couple years. And I think one big thing is the Holy Spirit. The last couple of years, I have really felt that the Holy Spirit has just engulfed my life, has done a lot of redeeming and restoring and rescuing within me, to make me stronger and healthier. And so I feel that. And I think that helps a ton with the emotional dysregulation because it doesn't take it away, but I feel like it is making me more aware and getting me stronger to handle it better. At the same time, obviously, I've been doing a lot of the work that Denise does with the 90-day U-turn. I've been working with survivors and I've been studying all about trauma and healing and all of that. And so I've gotten more knowledge along the way. And like I said at the very beginning, these emotional dysregulated moments, I would call them a spiral. And now I can see a spiral or an emotional dysregulated moment, and I can recognize it almost immediately. I would say within a minute or two, I recognize, oh my goodness, I am overreacting. The emotions do not match the situation. I notice that I am casting thoughts on to people, assuming they are thinking certain things, assuming the situation is this bad, when in reality, none of that has been made apparent. It's just my brain catastrophizing a situation, assuming worst case scenario, logic is out the window. Emotions are on high alert, and I can feel it in my body. I can feel my chest tighten up. I can feel myself in this fight or flight mode all of a sudden. Now, mind you, a couple years ago when I was, really bad with my emotional dysregulation, I was almost constantly in fight or flight mode. So to be able to recognize it was more difficult because it was my constant. It was my normal. Now I'm not in that constant fight or flight mode. Now, whenever it comes, all of a sudden, like an avalanche, I can recognize it and I can feel it. And that's when I can start to take steps towards getting regulated again. And so that's what I want to share with you guys. Maybe you can relate with this. Maybe you have trauma and you have emotional dysregulation. I hope that you can hear from me that I am not bashing us for this struggle. Like, it is an injury from what happened to us when we were a child. An injury, no different than being in a car accident or falling off your bike or falling out of a tree. It is an injury, and it is fixable. There are ways that we can begin to help our brain become regulated and become used to being regulated instead of the neural pathways that are all the time thinking dysregulation is what we are used to. So that's the path we're going to take. When we start creating new neural pathways, which is absolutely possible, it's amazing how God created our brain so that it continues to grow and get stronger, and you can choose right from wrong, and you can choose healthier over unhealthy. It's not easy, especially if your neural pathway towards the unhealthy or the dysregulated has been going on for years and years, and it's extremely deep, but it is possible. And I'm so grateful for those who have gone before me, who have done this work, who have studied the brain, who have studied neurology and trauma, and they know these tips work. And then I can also say from my own experience, without even knowing what I was doing, again, I thought it was I called it a spiral. I had begun to do many of these tips that were then helping me out of that spiral, which I now can see helps regulate my brain to where I am responding in the right amount emotionally and logically, both at the same time, because you don't want one over the other. You want it to be balanced. And so without even realizing it, it has already began to work in my life. But hearing this video and understanding the words and understanding the science and God behind it it's even more helpful. It's even more amazing to me. So I want to share with you guys some of these tips because you are not stuck. If you are struggling with this, you're not stuck. So some of the tips, what can you do? Number one, notice it. And so this is huge with being in touch with your body, in touch with your mind. One of the things that I learned too, which I thought was super important, is she talked about how oftentimes we will tell trauma survivors that you have to feel it to heal it. And she's like, yeah, absolutely. That's true. You do need to feel it to heal it. A lot of times, like, especially if you've been numbing your situation to where you don't feel it to heal it. Like, you don't want to even go there. You're brushing it under the rug. Let's act like this isn't a thing. Yeah, you have to pause and you have to put yourself in that situation to feel it in order to work through it and process it and move it to the other side of your brain. But this is where I learned again. She said sometimes trauma survivors are already feeling way too much. And she's talking about how the emotions are so high, they're feeling so many emotions at once. They're almost feeling it too much. And so you got to know the difference between when you're numbing it and you're avoiding feeling what needs felt from the moments when you're over feeling it and your emotions have gone out of control. Being able to recognize those things in yourself is a huge step in healing. Oftentimes, like when we have survivors come in to Stop Suffering in Silence and they're doing our programs, I'm realizing a lot of them would benefit greatly from understanding about neurological dysregulation or emotional dysregulation, because the process of going through our programs, there's things of it that will cause triggers that will dysregulate them, and then we won't see them for a couple weeks. And in those moments, if they had the tools to have first understood the dysregulation prior to starting our programs, it may allow them to recognize it right up front and begin these tips and tools so that they don't miss those few weeks. Sometimes when they've missed a couple weeks, they won't come back because then it begins to be too hard to come back. You feel like the oddball. You don't want to all of a sudden pop back in again, so you just don't come at all. Sometimes women will pop back in and they'll begin the journey again, but that dysregulation stole some time from them. And so learning this, I think, would be super powerful for all survivors and for our survivors before they begin our programs. But number one, you have to notice it. You have to feel the difference in your body. You have to recognize that I am being over emotional given the situation at this time. It's not always easy, but the more that you practice it, the more that you will feel it and be more aware of it. When you do recognize, so that was number one, now you have to pause. You have to step away from that situation for a second. If you feel extremely called to say your piece in that moment and to give the person in front of you all that you're feeling, then you need to pause even longer and sit for a second and wait for that logical part of your brain to catch up. You're not going to miss anything by pausing. You can, let's say this is at work and you're feeling this all of a sudden emotional dysregulation and you recognize it, you know what it is, and you are about ready to fly off the handle to your boss or to a coworker. Pause. Excuse yourself. Whether it's to the bathroom or to the parking lot or whatever, step away from the situation and pause before you say anything or do anything, because that's when the regrets come. That's when we begin to say and do things we don't actually mean, and then we have a mess to clean up afterwards. So pause in that moment. One of the things she said, which I never thought of this, but honestly, if I'm thinking logically, I could see how this could be a thing. She says, don't do activities during an emotional dysregulated state that needs your extra focus, like driving, operating a table saw, or going off somewhere by yourself, a place that you don't know. I never thought of that, but honestly, when I am driving and I am in a dysregulated state, I've never had an issue with getting in an accident, but I could totally see how my focus is not 100% where it needs to be in that moment by any means, and my emotions are winning. And so I think that was a good tip to remember when you're pausing. Don't do anything that could cause you danger if you're not 100% focused. And she also said, take note that talking about it in that moment can actually make dysregulation worse. So if you're thinking, I feel like I'm dysregulated, I can feel all these emotions, I'm just going to explain it to the person right now. Like, I'm just going to tell them this is no, like that will make it worse. It'll lead to confusion and misunderstanding. Take a break. Don't say anything in that moment. Put the conversation on pause. Separate from the situation for a time. Then, as far as tips to get yourself regulated again, I have 15 tips that she said in part, and then in part my own tips that have worked for me. One of the things that she said that I have not done before, but I'm interested in trying it potentially if nobody is around me at this time. But she says stomping your feet on the floor can help immensely with dysregulation. So the literal, like, even saying out loud, left, right, and stomping your feet will help to balance out your brain. So obviously my brain goes to my children when they get mad and they're in a fit and they're stomping their little feet. Maybe they're just regulating their nervous system. Or maybe they're throwing a fit. Yeah. But it is supposed to recalibrate your brain by stomping on the ground. Again, I wouldn't do that in front of people. Then you would have a whole lot of explaining to do. whenever you are regulated again. Take long, deep breaths. So, I so remember counselors telling me to take deep breaths to calm myself down. And I thought it was just the most pointless, stupidest advice ever. I didn't give it the time of day. And I should have, because as I started to get healthier and I started to actually implement some of these things that had been taught to me, I was wrong. And I apologize to all of the counselors who have told me to take deep breaths. Because when you really do take a long, deep breath and you hit that vagus nerve at the very tip of your belly, that when your belly, like your lungs expand and your belly expands and it hits that vagus nerve and it squeezes it, it lets out this comforting hug type feeling. And I wholeheartedly believe that that is the Holy Spirit. He's the breath in our lungs. And every single time I take a deep breath, I'm going to cry. And I feel that sensation through my body of comfort. I know it's him. I know it's him. And I love it. Sometimes it will send me into a yawning fit. But you know what? It's just more Holy Spirit in, and I'll take it. So if you see me yawning a lot, that could be part of it. So long, deep breaths. Some people also will call it the box breath, which I think so if you think of, breathing in for a certain amount of time, and then you hold it for a certain amount of time, and then breathe out, you're going down, and then hold it going over again. And they call it box breathing. And you can picture that in your brain, and that will help to regulate your emotions and your neurological state as well. This one is something that has worked for me. It's not something that she said. Have a list prepared of truths to read out loud. And guys, I kid you not. This list will say things. I have a little book, and it'll say things like, nobody's mad at you. Nobody's leaving you. Nobody thinks you're crazy. Like, you're still a friend, you're still a wife, all of these truths, because in my head, in that moment, I don't see or feel those things. It's like I said, the logic is gone. So this book of truths is filled with the logic that I know that I know that I know is true, except for the moments when I'm dysregulated. So having that list, keeping that nearby, when you start to feel the emotions rise, now many of the times I can picture the list in my head. So I know I'm getting stronger, and I can speak those things over myself. So I know that I'm doing better with the regulating piece. But in the beginning, I needed to have that list written down. And there's still things that I forget. When you are in the heat of the moment, you don't think of the ways to calm yourself down. And it makes sense, because when you're in the heat of the moment, it feels like you're in a house that's on fire. You're not going to be telling yourself, calm down, like everything's gonna be okay. Like that's not what your body or your brain is wired to do when you feel like your house is on fire. It is to run. So you're not going to think of those things. You have to train your brain to think of those things. Number 4, butterfly hugs. This is something that I have used. I think I learned butterfly hugs when I was at Selah House, which is an eating disorder facility in Anderson, Indiana, which was a fantastic place. But butterfly hugs, basically you make butterflies with your hands. And of course, you got to deep breathe when you do it, because the Holy Spirit in. But you place it on your chest, and it feels like a hug. One of the things that Anna, is it Rankle, said is backing yourself like against something to where it feels like a hug from all sides. There's something about a hug, and if you don't have a hug, like if you don't have a person there to actually give you a hug, to create it yourself, but there is something about a hug that causes that regulation in your brain. Literally, like scientifically, it is there. A hug can bring you back to balanced state. Some people, she brought up the idea of medication. I've only done 4 tips, but I'm going to jump over real quick to the idea of medicating somebody who has trauma to help regulate these emotions. And her point was, this is not a chemical imbalance. And so adding a chemical to something that's not a chemical imbalance could create a chemical imbalance that wasn't there to begin with. So knowing what it is you're medicating for, and if it's this emotional dysregulation, it's probably not the best option for helping you be regulated. In fact, it could add more problems and it could disrupt our body's natural ability to re-regulate. Another interesting thing is recreational drugs and alcohol. Though I've heard survivors say, I had to drink to calm my emotions down. So then when you're in a dysregulated state, which is a very common injury for what you have been through, now your brain associates you need alcohol for that moment to regulate yourself. I've also heard survivors say, I couldn't feel anything unless I had alcohol in my system. And so again, they had been flatlined, their emotions, and instead of regulating it naturally, they go to a recreational drug that creates that themselves, but then you become dependent, obviously, on it. So recreational drugs as a way of coping through this can actually cause more harm than you might imagine. All right, so then I've given you 4 tips. Let me keep going. Body shaking is another one that I read about, and I think it's probably similar to stomping your feet. It helps to recalibrate your brain. Wash your face with cold water. This helps me get back into the present moment. A wet rag behind my neck can sometimes help, and that's often when I'm in like a dissociative state. But I think it would work with this too, because you need to get back into the present balanced moment. So washing your face with cold water, washing your hands, just anything with that cold sensation to help kind of bring you back feeling in the present moment. Sing worship music or dance. I think she said just sing and dance, but I think worship music works most of all, in my opinion. Plus, you're taking deep breaths whenever you do it. So Holy Spirit is in more whenever you're singing worship music, and the dance would go well with the body shaking and the stomping of your feet. And so that will help to regulate your brain. Now, I know what you're thinking. At least I think I know what you're thinking. You're picturing yourself at work and you had just had an emotional dysregulated state. And so then you're going to go into the bathroom and you're going to sing at the top of your lungs worship music and dance and stomp your feet and shake your body. And so know your situation. Do the things that you can do based off where you are. Maybe you just need to sit in there and give yourself a butterfly hug, wash your face, things like that. Journal. Oh my goodness. When I journal, it helps me so dang much. And this is one of the first things that I do when I start to feel dysregulated now, or what I was thinking was like a spiral. I would just start writing down how I feel and my emotions. Guys, I kid you not. It was probably 2 months ago, maybe. I had gotten, and I do this about once a month, or about once a year. I got the brilliant idea that I no longer needed, I am on a depression medication. And I was like, I think I'm doing pretty good. I don't think I need it anymore. I'm on a very low dose. But anyway, I decide to just stop because I'm doing fine. I don't want to have to go into the doctor to get another, doctor's bill and all that. So I'm like, okay, I think I'm good. So I stopped it. It had been about 2 or 3 days later, and I was in my closet on the floor crying. Like I knew that my emotions did not match where I was. So I start journaling. And as I'm journaling, I'm writing down, I think it would be better if I just was no longer here. I think that would be better for everybody else if I died, basically. And then it hit me because I see it in black and white. oh my goodness, I need my medicine still. Yes, absolutely. I still have some depression that needs medicine, and that's okay. But I love the fact that journaling, when you can write it down and you can see it in black and white, it just becomes so much more clear. It's like that logical side of your brain catches up real quick and is like, wait a minute, where have you been? What has been going on? And how did you get so far off track so quickly? But journaling is huge for me when I start to feel dysregulated. Um, she recommends gargling water. I don't know. I think it's probably worth a shot. Visualization. Okay, so mind you, me personally, I do visualization when I'm in a dysregulated state, but I do worst case scenario visualization. I picture things way worse than what they actually are. So switch it and start to think things through in a positive way. In best case scenario, this is most likely what is going on in a good way. And that will help calm your body down from thinking the house is on fire. Praying out loud. It is so interesting to me how my it's the brachius part of your brain shuts down in these moments, and I can't get words out, and it takes everything in me to pray out loud in these moments. And I'm shocked at how hard it is to get the words out. But once I start, then it flows, and then the peace follows and the comfort, and I'm balanced again, and I'm back into both logical and emotional state. Tapping techniques. I don't know if you guys have seen these. You can Google or look up YouTube videos about where to tap and how to tap, but there's certain spots on your body, hot spots or whatever, that you can tap, and it will send, kind of like the vagus nerve, it'll send a comforting feeling, and it'll help ground you and bring you back to present. Connecting with someone that you feel safe. Again, be mindful though of what you say and what you do. Sometimes this could be not helpful. If you're in a state of panic and emotions and you try to call somebody and they don't answer, oh goodness. So back in the day, yeah, that was a thing. And I would think, well, they don't care. They just don't, I don't matter to them. Talk about being embarrassed about how you acted. But again, it was a trauma state. It was an injury. It is from things that happened, and it makes sense. But I'm so grateful to not be there anymore. But just be mindful that if you're in a place where calling somebody, it's not their responsibility to get you back to your regulated state either. And I think that's a huge thing to remember. 14, get in nature. Oh my goodness, that's a totally other form of grounding. Like literally get your toes in the grass, in the dirt, breathe in the fresh air. Holy Spirit, breathe it in again. Listen to the birds, just be out in nature. That can help bring you back to present and balanced as well. And number 15, ask yourself questions. Now, I am not able to do this where I'm asking it like out loud because like I said, it's very difficult for me to say things in this moment. But in my mind, I will start asking myself questions. Is this really a reaction or a situation that deems this reaction? And what I'm feeling validated for what is going on? And I'm not shaming myself or mad or anything like that. I'm just taking an inward look and asking myself questions. Okay, does this make sense? Kind of trying to kickstart my logic side of the brain by asking these questions. And I think this is something that I have learned in the past from when I have reached out to people and they have asked these questions. I think it's just my subconscious kicking in and going ahead and asking myself the logical questions that need asked in the moment. So those are 15 tips on how you can get yourself regulated again after having an emotionally dysregulated event. honestly, I think this Anna Runkle had a lot of great things to say. She has been through this as well, so she knows from like a professional standpoint, but also a personal standpoint. So I hope this was helpful. I talked a lot, obviously, because I'm the only one here. So, but I hope that it was helpful. I hope that if you see yourself in some of these things, or if you can picture somebody in your mind who is going through this, that it can help you have a little bit of grace, help you know what to say in those moments. And if it's you who's going through it, I hope you're able to give yourself some grace and see that, again, this is not your fault. This is a result of things that were done to you when you were only a child, and it's your body's way of protecting yourself. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that we have the tools that we have, but sometimes we have to get our body out of the deep neurological pathways that have been leading us down a destructive path and choose better for ourselves. And it's difficult and it's hard. And if you need somebody to help you along that healing journey, along with changing some of those neural pathways and ways that you can do that, please follow us, like, subscribe, join our programs, join our community, because we're constantly learning, constantly growing together. And it is an incredible community to be a part of. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you have an amazing week. Please comment below if you have any questions or any thoughts of your own. I would love to hear it. And yeah, thanks for being here. Have an awesome day, you guys, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your event, workshop, school, church, or organization, then please email racheltimothy.stopsis@gmail.com. If you are interested in donating to the Stop SIS ministry, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below. Or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence or you know somebody who is, then check out our website, stopsuffering.org, to learn more about our online programs and resources. We will always recommend that you also reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.